So here we are live with our guest of today, our wonderful guest, Adi Yekutieli. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm doing fine. How are you?
Very well. So before I forget, because lately I tend to forget, we have a jingle that we worked so hard to prepare. So we start off, you've got Mel with a jingle. I have to have that jingle, right?
Waiting to hear it.
Okay, here we go.
Get a chair, grab a seat, or we'll sweep you off your feet. We move, we groove, you got Mel. Ease your legs, rest a while, all you gotta do is smile. We're swell, can't you tell, you got Mel. When the show begins, you better hold on real tight, or before you know it, you'll be high as a kite. Take a break, settle down, we're the only show in town. SRO, don't you know, you got Mel. Give it up, don't think twice, we're a hurricane on ice. What the hell, give a yell, ring your bell, show and tell. Mademoiselle, give a smell, you got Mel. You've got Mel. Get a chair, grab a seat, or we'll sweep you off your feet. We move.
And Mel has Adi. Adi Yekutieli. Start at the beginning.
You want me to start at the beginning?
Of course, otherwise...
At 12 midnight, the night I was born, my mother talked to the midwife, and after they had a cup of black coffee, it was around 2 o'clock at night, they said, well, let's get going. And then it was about an hour, and that was it. So at least the beginning was really, my mother considered it really painless.
And
after that, became more problematic, but until that point, it was fine.
What kind of a kid were you?
Surprisingly, I didn't talk until I was about 3 years old. I think what I saw around was enough to just take in and not voice my opinion. And but I became talkative, you know. Throughout the years, I became more and more talkative. But I think I was really a baby or a kid that was very much of an observer. I watched and examined dynamics of grown-ups, which I had a whole philosophy of what they are, which they always denied. And they said, you know, you're a kid, you could never know that. And I said, you know what, when I grow up, and I'll remember this event, and we'll see who was right. I was right. In most cases, the way I analyze the grown-ups around me.
Can you give us an example?
For example, when there was a dynamic between the grown-ups themselves with us kids, you know, so parents always have this kind of authority of what is right and what is wrong, what is fair and what is not fair. So I would have my opinion, even if it was about somebody else. Let's say somebody was harmed, and they said, "Oh no, their feelings were not hurt." But I said, "No, of course their feelings were hurt." So those kind of things. Since some of these people are still alive, I'd rather, keep it. Although most of them are not, the majority of them are not.
When did you discover your love for art? You are, I should say, an international art authority curator. You have moved hundreds of thousands of people to become artists. When did you start to feel this urge to be an artist?
One would expect that it would be really a glorious discovery, but it was just I discovered my love for art, and really by elimination. I was not good in anything. Actually, I wasn't good in math. I wasn't good in Bible. I wasn't good in reading. I moved countries when I was very young, so I was really behind almost in anything. And then we grew up in Jerusalem, and just at the time when I was around 8 years old, and the Israeli museum, was actually being built across of our street. And my mother said, maybe you should go there and do I wasn't even the artist of the class, because those were held positions tightly also. And then when I was about I think, fourth grade, just after the 6 Day War. And they opened the youth wing, and I was one of the first kids that went to the youth wing. And I had the most amazing teacher. And I think his influence on me in terms of what art is, what's a creative process, how you do a creative process that is that encourages to do art and not tells you how to do art. It all started in with him, and from then on it became something really that was that, and being in the Scouts were really the things I was good at.
Okay, so Adi, we on the program we like to mention the names of the heroes of our lives, of the teachers.
So my first hero was somebody, I don't know if you knew him, but his name was Izika Gaon, who was at that time a student in Bezalel. Later on, he became the head curator of the design department in the Israeli Museum. And you would think he would be, I would have my interaction with him at that time, and then it would fade away. But we kept in contact for many, many years, even after I became an adult. And I think he was probably in my childhood, in terms of art, he was really my only hero. And he delivered he was not only very wise, but he taught me how to, he demonstrated that you could teach 20 kids at the same time, 20 different things in an easier way than trying to force them all to do the same exercise.
Wow.
And that I internalized completely in terms of how I taught later on in many, many different programs, some that were more formal, some that were less formal, but it's not more effort. It's actually when somebody is motivated and does something that is relevant to them, they'll need less attention, and they'll actually, they'll be more, and they'll have more courage in their discoveries, and they'll have more confidence in their creativity.
Okay, that's very, very clever. So you ended up studying art in America?
I didn't want to study art since I barely finished high school. So I was really mostly an autodidact. I was taught, by myself. My mother was an artist, and I felt very comfortable with that. And I started actually doing textiles, weaving. I started actually as a weaver. And then I had, and here we're coming to the second hero of my life. My father had a cousin who was an art professor in LA. And she came to visit Israel after many, many years that whole side of the family was basically disowned by the family because they left Israel, and her father left Israel between the First and Second World War, and nobody was allowed. We're a very Zionist kind of family. And so here she comes to visit when I was probably just after the army. I was about 21, 22. And she saw what I did, and she said, "You have to come to America." She said, "Even if you're not going to study because you have such a trauma from school." And that's when I immediately, she was the coolest person I've ever met until that point, considering she was my parents' age, but she was really California dreaming. She was the most hip person I've ever, coming from Israel, who was really at that point really quite provincial. And I moved to Berkeley, to a place, and I studied in a place that was not formal called Fiberworks in Berkeley. And then she said, "You know what? Maybe we should send your portfolio to be accepted to graduate school." I said, "Graduate school? I didn't do my undergraduate even." And she said, "But the way you taught yourself, you went through all the exercises." So I applied for 3 different universities, and I was accepted, to my surprise or my disbelief, because I thought it was just because of my eyes that they accepted me, not because of anything that had to do with any talent. And then I went to, and I decided to move to southwest of LA, to a university called Claremont. And that's where I did my MFA. And at a very young age. I graduated when I was 24.
So at the age of 24, you had a master's degree, but no bachelor's degree,
Yes, yes,
which is remarkable. But you're a remarkable guy. And you told me once that jail changed your life in a good way. You
yes,
went to jail not as an inmate, but as a teacher.
yes, yes.
What was that all about?
So a few years after I finished my MFA, we went to Israel. We came back, and we were pregnant. My wife at that time was pregnant with my first son, and I came to America really her in the 7th month pregnant,
Wow.
and I was jobless because being an artist was not something you could actually earn a living doing anything. And it was advertised by an organization called Outreach, proposals for people who want to give any solutions that have to do with inmates that are the type that come back, that are punished, go out of jail, not murderers, of course, but small crimes that keep on returning to the jail, and they had no idea why that phenomenon is actually happening, which I had no idea about that anyway also.
It's called recidivism or something.
Yes. And I didn't come from that. At that point, I wasn't really very involved in the social issues as I've been since then, where connected between art and community. But I sent a proposal which had a certain concept of why I think they're returning to jail. Let's put it in a time frame. It was in 86. It was just at the beginning of the notion in the States of developing the notions that had to do with multiculture.
Mhm.
And my point was, or what I thought was the reason they come back to jail is that in jail, it's like a salad before you mix it up. Every ethnic group is by themselves, and everybody feels very comfortable and very protected. And once they go out of jail, they're in the mixed society, which America is, and that's when the clash happens, and then they go back into jail. It was in the Chino jail that was at that time was the first jail in America that had an art program. Actually, something that you would like, because the person who managed it was a good friend of mine called Tom Skelly. He was an artist and a musician, and he would have the best bands who came to perform in LA the night before their premiere in the clubs. They would come and play in the prison.
Wow.
So the inmates had the best music program you could even fathom. And anyway, my assumption was that if in jail they would actually practice collaboration, doing it through the arts, but in a multicultural setting, they would actually practice how it's supposed to be outside. Anyway, they accepted my program. Then I appeared. I was 27 at the time, and much skinnier and much less confident than I'm now. And I came from my first workshop, it was 8 hours, no less. And there I was standing in the middle of this hallway, in this hall, and with 50 different inmates staring at me. I have to say, I was covered really, literally with sweat. And I really had no idea what to do. But then I understood something that was very, very important, but not because I was smart, but by fear and combined with intuition. And I asked if there's anybody there, one of the inmates who know how to operate a video camera. We have to remember the time; it was way before internet and all that kind of thing. And of course, there was the Jewish guy who was there because of all kinds of copying in Hollywood of movies. He know how to operate a video camera. We got a video camera, and I told them, we have now 8 hours. You could ask me anything you want. Because I realize, now I'm analyzing in hindsight, that when you want to work with people, you have to be as vulnerable as you expect them to be. Now, they were very practiced in in interrogation, of course, and in cross-examination. So after about an hour or two, I released even my white lies, you know, and there was nothing they didn't ask me. But after that, we had an amazing meetings because they really trusted me. I divided them into 3 different groups. There were artists, you know, visual artists, there were writers, and there were musicians. And you as a musician could actually understand that, you know, when it's exactly the concept of a jazz session. Because if you have people who are from different ethnic backgrounds, each playing on a different instrument, of course you're concentrated in the music. They respond to each other, they speak to each other, they hold a conversation. And at first I worked with them in the 3 different disciplines, you know, the writing, the painting, and that. But by the end of the program, the artists will paint, interpreting the music that was played, the writers would write, and they produced the most amazing work. And I think that's when it exposed to me the whole notion that is also very, very important, and which is one of my main tools in working, certainly in the community, which is the notion of collaboration. You know, when you come from the arts that are individual arts, you know, it's just all about you. But the notion of collaboration that is based on the difference, you collaborate with people that are different than you, not people that are similar to you, which is another thing that most people do the opposite. And I think since then I've been researching that. The whole notion of collaboration as part of also as a social tool, as a political tool, and as a creative endeavor. And I taught, but I think it was about 80. Let's say, what was that? Probably 89 or something like that. I taught the first art collaboration class in a graduate program. And it was amazing because although artists came into this program as individual mature artists, the work together was always better than their individual work. It doesn't mean they kept on doing that way. But I certainly had phases in my life where I collaborated for several years with other artists, including my ex-wife. So that's a long answer for a short question.
So your time in jail changed your life, and is this?
You know, it's a very humbling experience because you know you realize that you know it's we're not. People are not as so different as they think they are, you know, because some of these people, you know, were just like people that I went to school with. You know, they had records, they did great art, you know, they came in. It was a time where, you know, you got busted on smoking weed, and there you were in jail, you know. So it was and it made me really, and I think especially in America, it was big for me. I even then felt in the 80s, 90s that America is a very, 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 very judgmental society to certainly to inmates or homeless or, you know, minorities and things like that. And I think it was for me a really eye opener in terms of what society is really in America. And being a country that is really made out of, you know, immigrants that came from different countries, which was very similar to Israel. And I started comparing those notions also. It interests me. The whole social thing interests me no less than the art, which I think that's something that usually artists are really into just their art, and people who are active, you know, in social causes are active in social causes. They don't necessarily mix, although we see now that it's coming closer.
I don't usually do this on the program, but I want to recite for you a part of a song by Phil Oakes, who was in the 1960s a singer and a protest singer. And he has a song called "There But for Fortune," and it starts, "Show me a young man, show me a jail, show me a prison man whose face is growing pale, and I'll show you a young man with so many reasons why and there but for fortune may go you or I.
Mm-hmm.
So you reminded me of this song. Remind me, I'll find it for you. So Adi, you have now, so we're fast forwarding now several decades, and you have organized so many of these social art communities, and now you're doing something with seniors, which is very poignant because
Yeah.
of this era where people my age who don't feel old are suddenly forced to be old.
Yes. You know, it was really something that was in. Let me take you. I'll go right into why it's so interesting for me, but I'll take you back one step to my childhood, because I remember when I was around 12, I was very curious already about older people. Now, when I was 12, I think those older people were around probably people in the 40s and the 50s. But I remember asking them, even then, I would interview them, not in a formal way, not as a researcher, but I was always ask older people about their understandings about life and about regrets or things they wanted to do that they didn't do. I think not in a formal way. I've probably interviewed hundreds or not, or maybe thousands of people in the last 50, 60 years of that. And I realized that most of the things that people wanted to do were very tangible. It's not that everybody wanted to go to the moon or climb the Everest. You know, people had very, very precise dreams, but most of them felt either that they were not deserving of them or that it's not the right time. And I started really looking at people and thinking, and maybe because I came from a family that people died very young, and I understood from a very early age that there's a beginning and there's an end. You know, most kids, by the time they meet somebody, know anybody that died, they're really way into their 20s. You know, I was aware of that when I was already 4 or 5 years old, from different circumstances. And then I knew, but I wasn't a fear of that. I knew, but there was a sense of urgency. And I think when and then as years went by, and when I first started working with people that are older, and it was considered we had a hard time because it was considered very unsexy from all the social groups. You know, it was never worthy of anything. People didn't care, the press didn't care, and the institutions, the money wasn't there. I still think it's not there, but I think it's rising now. And I felt that when people got to their later years, they realized all the things they want. You know, people come to a certain age and their kids say, "Oh, you've done so much in your life, just sit and relax." And yet people wonder about all the things they haven't done yet and what they want to accomplish. And there's something very forceful in society in that changing of the guards, one thing, which is probably a dynamic that was always there in history, older people, younger people. But I think now the notion of loneliness in these times of the elderly, or even before the corona, were very, 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 very strong, and population is also growing. You know, people die older, and suddenly people are faced with not okay, you're going to retire, and then in 3 or 4 years that's it, kaput. No, it could be a period of 20, 30 years, and it's a whole, and it's something that not only has, for me, I thought it was very, very important because I always had this notion of older people as old, wise people. You know, people that have knowledge, people that understand something. It's true that when they say what they understand, young people don't always want to hear it. But nevertheless, that wisdom has to be collected and could become something or transformed into something that is relevant within the world. And then I started doing different projects and different things, and that became very innovative in terms of they all had to do with how you to develop different formats where people could actually communicate with older people in a very challenging and very rewarding and very interesting and relevant and way. Not only take care of their physical needs, and I was very close to my parents when they were very old, and I wasn't fearful of that. And I found that it was an amazing period. It was a whole new period that we could share, not in anxiety, but actually in great emotional and discovery, and taking those notions and finding ways where art could be involved in doing that. So the creative process becomes part of the thing of where you could connect people. It was really a perfect solution, and that's where I didn't really invent it, intentionally, but I started working with a father of a good friend of mine that retired, and like many people, he wanted to, start painting and stuff. He was in finances before. He had nothing to do with art. And I started visiting him in his studio, and a few years after that, and he had a stroke, and he was paralyzed in half his body, and he was really, crumbling, into himself. And I was really devastated because at that point I was already very connected to him. And I started doing something that I remember as a child doing, because before internet, there were letters, and we would pen pal. And I remember I used to pen pal with a few different people that lived, in different places in Israel.
Maybe you pen pal with me. We had Israeli pen pals that used to put dried flowers.
Yes.
And send them to us.
You see, and we would wait for the letter to come, and we would count the days, and it was a whole different thing. And what I asked Israel, this older man who was then probably in his late 70s, I told him he couldn't really move his hands. He couldn't paint so well, but he could move his hands on an application of an iPad, of a drawing application. And he would send me letters. He would send me images, and I would answer him in writing. And about after 500 of those, he started walking again. Now, I don't know, I wasn't into the brain, research or anything, but there was certainly something that happened to him in terms of his motivation, and in terms of his creativity, and in terms of breathing, not concentrating only on what you can do, but concentrating on what you can. And the creative process is always, I know it creates really good, it's about positive things. It's about discovery. Any discovery is better than limitations. And we kept on in the format, and after about 1,000 of these exchanges, a group of psychologists took the format of my writing and said there's principles to the way you write. And the most important principle of Art Friend, which is the main thing that I'm doing now, is that when I write to somebody, when I respond to their drawing or the image that they're sending, because it could be photography, it could be anything, you don't have to be an artist really. It's not only that I don't judge and critique it, and not only I encourage them to send me another one, I always respond in terms of what the image reminds me in my life. And in that point, I connect in a place that is really a strong vulnerability, again, with the vulnerability. And when you write something that is relevant about your life, when you respond to somebody who just send you an image, it's a very powerful thing to both people. And that's why the exchange is an even one. It's not like I'm taking care of him. I would wait for him to send his image every morning. It ended up that he sent 6 to 8 images a day, and he lived 10 years after all of this, and it was almost 10,000 images,
Wow.
which left a remarkable and visual memory to his family.
So Adi, you've reached out to teachers and communities all over the world.
You know?
Um, does this work for PTSD? Have you tried it?
What
It
do you mean?
sounds like your approach for people that have had that are post trauma.
We actually after the second Lebanon war, during the second Lebanon war, I did a collaboration with a friend of mine who is a director of a psychology NGO in the Upper Galil, and we built a program. We wrote a book of how to deal. We knew that by the end of the war, nobody would want to deal with it because there's a notion of, oh, let's not wake up the bears anymore. You know, we went through it. That's it. We're back to life. And we wrote a book that was intended for not for psychologists, but for the teachers in the classrooms, that combined the notions of healing and rebuilding and inner strength in the community in order to prevent the trauma to stay and become post-trauma that is not dealt with. And we printed about 27,000 of these books. It was the head psychologist in the Ministry of Education approved it, although it was their responsibility actually to do something like that. Not, we were just private people. And I think in many ways, now that you mention it, it's like it seems like there's no connection between the things we're talking about, but they're actually intertwined in terms of their human philosophy and approach and caring and the thing is that so in places of conflict and in places of healing. And the same thing with elderly or people with disabilities or youth at risk, it's always the same. I think the life values that I'm talking about are very, very similar. I don't think I have changed in that sense at all since I was a kid.
So what you're talking, in medicine, you talk about letting a wound breathe.
Yeah.
So essentially, that's what you're doing. You're reaching out to hundreds of thousands of people to give them the same way that you would make a dressing that's safe so that the wound can breathe. You're kind of creating an atmosphere where wounded people can let oxygen into their lives. And that's something very beautiful. and very often when I've come upon one of your classes, you guys say to me, Mel, you can't come in. And everybody's dressed. But I understand that it's a process of opening wounds, right?
Yeah.
And it's remarkable. So I guess the question, we're almost out of time, and it's past like.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And so here's my question. You are a well-known artist. You have art in museums. You've had many of your own. How do you say taruchot in English?
Exhibitions.
Yeah, thank you. You've had many exhibitions of your own, and you spend most of your time helping other people express themselves artistically. And I'm going to guess that just like teachers, people like me, you reaching out to others is a way of opening your own wound.
I don't know if it's about opening, but I think it's, when I look back at the circumstances of my life, without getting too much detail into them now, I'm amazed sometimes that I survived and I have self-esteem and self-worth, and I feel that if I manage to do that, there's something there that I could really teach, and the impact of that many times is much bigger than showing my art in a gallery. And I think that's why in the different projects that we've done over the years with Association for Art and Community, And we reached to almost 600,000 people. It's many, many, many people in different, and it worked even in places where I didn't know the language, like in China or places like that. So I think at that point, we have to. I always believe that if I'll ever have any relevant knowledge, I will never keep it just for myself, because then it's like, what's the point of taking it to the grave? Whatever it is, the little wisdom I've gathered, and let's spread it as much as we can, and that's what I'm trying to figure out, the easiest way of doing it, to do it in a project that anybody could actually do it. And I think Art Friend is a project of that, because at the end of it, it's two people that are communicating every day, but in a meaningful communication and not just in a trivial or, something like that. And I think, there's many notions that talk about that, when you're there in a relevant way, in a real way, with one person, it's really like it's a whole world. So, but I think that's why if people would practice these methods, I'm not sure it could save the world, but it could certainly give a certain balance to things that we're experiencing now, that are full of abandonment, neglect, fear, etc.
So this has been a remarkable discussion. I'm not sure I can hear you.
I said I didn't want to be so dramatic.
No, but being dramatic is good. And to end up, you look very young, and you are young, but when you were a kid, there was something called the Beatles.
Yes.
And I asked all my interviewees whether they like the Beatles, and if so, do they have a Beatles song that they love in particular?
Michelle, My Belle.
Really? And why is that?
That was the first slow I danced when I was, I think it was in a party that we had when we were I think in 6th or 7th grade. And I remembered there was a record player, it put it on. I remember who I invited. I don't want to embarrass her because I still remember her name. And that was the first slow. At that time, it was a very significant achievement for me.
Because you were shy? Because you were shy?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't. I wasn't shy, but I wasn't arrogant. I wasn't like. It wasn't. I wasn't one of those that got anything they wanted. But I was. But I was always very. I was always very much examining and looking at things and that kind of thing. But I remember that as a very touching moment. So Michelle, great.
So just to get you out of your comfort zone, can you sing me a few bars?
I can, but I don't know really the words. But Michelle, my belle, da na na, na na.
Beautiful. I will say the only words I know that you'll understand, my Michelle.
Great text.
Yeah. So Adi Yekutieli, it's been marvelous talking with you. And I mean, I've known you for 3 years now, but we never had this kind of discussion.
Yeah.
And I have several things I'm going to send you. And who knows, this might be the beginning of something new. Who knows?
You see, this opportunity of changing times.
Absolutely. So I should say that before we go to advertise that you are the head of Omanut Bakila with Galit Iluz, and you're reaching out to many, many communities across Israel, particularly senior citizens. You have support from the Rothschild Foundation. And so I salute you on behalf of all of the people that you're helping, and the few hundred people that have seen this program. So Adi, it's been incredible to have you, and thank you, Galit, for making this suggestion. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Adi. Toda.
Bye-bye.